conversation with Phnam Bagley, an industrial designer based in San Francisco. She has, amongst other things, experience in space design, which is literally designing spaces in space. So, for example, things like space shuttles or spacecraft and then space stations. So the conversation was really, my goal was to pick her brain on the cultural aspects of space exploration, on the cultural and economic and designer aspects of one thing going into space, and the other thing also how Earth changes if we have more space exploration. So this is in light of what I've said many times before on the podcast, that we at Orange Capital Partners really try to explore different avenues of thinking, different avenues of being not inspired, that's the wrong word, but connecting thoughts that maybe some people have with the thoughts that we have, and this could lead to new discoveries or new ideas. This is the gist of this conversation. This is the Not Even Wrong podcast. It's April 5th, 2021. This is Krim Delco. For the day, the fund is up 4%. The market is up 1.4%. For the year, we are now down 30 basis points, and the market is up 8.3%. We're underperforming by about 8.5%. Today, we had the result of the Tesla delivery numbers, which were way better than expected. A phenomenal situation for Tesla. I think this almost warrants its own podcast. So I just want to mention this shortly before I go into discussion that I have with Phnam Bagley. So Tesla delivered 185,000 cars in Q1. They produced 180,000 cars. So they drew down inventory. It's much better than the street expected. There were a couple of reasons to expect not so good numbers this quarter. One was the chip shortage. One was the ongoing difficulties, let's say, in supply chain related issues because of COVID, and then also fear of competition in China and in Europe. And all of these things were just brushed aside. Tesla delivered blowout numbers, phenomenal numbers. They're on track to be growing way above 50% year over year, and it's a good sign for Tesla for two reasons. One is our thesis has always been that there is a secular trend towards more electric cars, a secular trend towards more market share for Tesla within electric cars. So we believe that, let's say 5 years from now, electric cars will be definitely more than 10% market share of all the cars, at least in the markets where Tesla plays, and the Tesla will have a very large share of that electric market. So Tesla is growing share within the electric car market space, and electric cars are growing share relative to the rest of the market. We have said several times on this podcast that competition from players such as Volkswagen or Ford, and even the Chinese players like NIO, it is there, but it's not a concern for the growth story of Tesla. And this is, in our view, a very good sign. This quarter is one of those quarters that sets the stock to go in for new highs. Now, the stock was up roughly 5% today. Given the massive underperformance of Tesla this year, this is nothing. We believe that within a foreseeable future, we will reach all-time highs and even go above that. It also depends a little bit on the earnings call, but assuming the earnings call will deliver good news, then we believe Tesla is poised for very strong performance. On top of that, there is also a development within Apple that I just want to mention shortly. This is an episode on its own, so I'm probably going to make an episode about this either today or tomorrow. It is, I would say, a marketing approach, a PR approach that Tim Cook has launched in order to prepare the market for some sort of cooperation with Tesla. The cooperation between Apple and Tesla, in our view, would be phenomenal for both companies. I think the best from Apple's perspective would be to buy Tesla. That is, of course, more difficult now than before. It's still possible. They could pay, let's say, $1 trillion, and just that's still half the market cap of Apple. But the point is that an integration between Apple and Tesla, we think could be useful for several reasons. One is reach the scale that Tesla wants to reach. The other is also improve the user experience even more. While Tesla is by far the best car company delivering user experience, it is still trailing Apple in certain areas. For example, face recognition, dealing with App Store issues, integrating App Store and apps into the ecosystem. Those are things that Tesla, just by nature, is not as good as Apple. We believe on the user interface and App Store side, there is a lot of potential. And of course, Apple needs manufacturing and self-driving technology that they don't have, that Tesla has. So this could be an interesting catalyst. We've also heard rumors of a Toyota cooperation. We might as well see in the next quarter a cooperation between Toyota and a cooperation with Apple, and both of these things combined with the fundamental strength of Tesla could propel the stock to way beyond its highs. So this is why we're very bullish on Tesla more than even before. I think the last couple of days have solidified our positive view on the company and the stock. Now let's get to the conversation with Phnam Bagley. She is CEO, I think, and founder, or both, of a company called Nonfiction. They do industrial design, architecture, product design, things along those lines. And it's a futuristic company in the sense that they really work a lot on projects that are futuristic. So for example, they do, like I said, they think about space design, so literally how to design, let's say, dwellings in space. How is a moon colony going to look like? Well, how is the landing spot for a moon colony going to look like? How is Mars going to look like? Questions like that, of course, are maybe a little bit early now to think about, but somebody has to do it. Somebody has to think about these things. I spoke with Nam, for example, if she works with SpaceX about these things, and she said no, she doesn't, but SpaceX has teams within SpaceX thinking about that. Plus, of course, SpaceX has also teams thinking about how to build a spaceport in Brownsville. Another thing that somebody like Nam could be doing, which is, let's say, think about how to build spaceports on Earth. So there's a couple of things that the conversation was generally about what is space architecture, which is a degree that she got from I think it was the University in Houston. That how does one actually get into this field? We spoke about the problems that you have. Let's say she mentioned that if you look at space exploration as it is today, it is very functional in a sense that it is designed by engineers for engineers. And what that means is it's very kind of raw and also complicated. A lot of things are difficult to use, not very human in the sense that it's not your slick Apple or Tesla design in the International Space Station, for example. No, it's not. It looks very like I always joke, it looks a bit like a Russian design, or just very rudimentary. Okay, we need this, we need that, let's put it together and let's go up in space and make sure the thing doesn't blow up, and if that doesn't happen, the mission is accomplished. There is no thought about, okay, how does a human feel in this space? How are there motions that we get from the being there? All these kinds of things that Phnam with her team is trying to put together and create a more human, a more inviting environment. So I think that alone is a very interesting thought. I mean, it might sound obvious, but it's not. I mean, if you look at spacecraft, space stations, space everything right now, it doesn't look like that. The first time I've seen something along those lines was when I saw those two astronauts using the SpaceX launcher to bring them to the International Space Station, and they were using touchscreen technology to get the spacecraft going. I thought, oh, well, this is interesting. This is Tesla design within spacecraft. This is more user-friendly than all the buttons and knobs and all that stuff that you usually see in a cockpit. This is something that I could imagine using. And I think that's what also Phnam was kind of alluding to. So she works on those things. I asked her, let's say, what are the problems? What are some of the biggest problems that a space architect has to think about and versus thinking about Earth? And she said, well, there's two things. One is gravity and the other is radiation. So we don't have as much gravity up there. It's microgravity, as they call it, than we have here, at least in what we consider now space exploration, which is going to orbit of Earth, going to the moon and Mars. maybe you have gravity in on other planets and things like that, but not as far as we can go at this point. So that's one thing that she spoke about, the gravity side, and she said, for example, just simple tasks, opening a door, using a tool, cooking, things like that are difficult. We didn't talk about this specifically, but having sex is kind of difficult without gravity. So we spoke about that. Actually, procreation in space is very difficult. She actually said it. She said you can't have babies in space. I did a little bit more research about that. One is gravity, the problem. The other is radiation, which is the second big problem in space. Radiation is very, very serious up there, and there's this thing called solar flares, which is another boost of radiation, even more than the normal. And what it really does is it creates an ion storm that goes through pretty much anything. So it threatens physical bodies, but also our human bodies, and most importantly, it threatens the DNA composition of our bodies. So when you have, let's say, sperm fertilizing eggs in a sort of procreation environment, you have a huge risk of DNA mutations and basically degeneration of the embryo and all that. So I have scheduled, I'm trying to schedule a call with a specialist on space procreation, a gentleman from the Kansas City University. But for now, I don't have a lot of knowledge about this other than that it's a problem. So procreation is a problem, which of course, it would be a nice question for Elon Musk to ask. How do you envision building a colony on Mars if we can't procreate? At some point, we have to be able to reproduce. At some point, we should be able to have the firstborn human on Mars. But that seems to be not possible in the foreseeable future. So those are the two big problems, again, gravity and radiation. I think it's a beautiful segue into the beginning of infinity, again, the beginning of infinity, which talks about us humans inhabiting space, and Earth is part of space, and solving problems, creating new problems. And those are the two big problems we have to solve: how to recreate gravity, how to live without gravity, and how to deal with radiation. And of course, once we solve those problems, we'll create new problems, better problems, and so on and so forth. So this is, I have no doubt that we will find solutions for these problems. But right now, those are the big question marks. And Phnam, with her design studio, is trying to help solve those problems. She's certainly not a structural engineer in that sense, but, and this is another conversation we had, she seems very versatile in combining, let's say, university subjects. So either she herself is already versatile in the sense that she has degrees in several areas of design and that touch upon engineering and physics, but she seems to be very knowledgeable and very versatile in talking to people in different fields, and also knows people. And she spoke about this, that how she sees a lot of people from one field combining fields. So for example, bioengineering turning into soft robotics, which is basically robotics with like human type tissue. So things where we start really combining biology, robotics, machine learning, things like that into one field and combine things. So she spoke about the magnitude of combination. I call it combinatorial studies, where you take a couple of doors at university, so the chemistry door, the physics door, the biology door, and you start putting them together in one room. And instead of having three people from different areas, one person studies three areas, maybe not the whole thing, but at least looks at some of the aspects and tries to bridge and maybe cross-fertilize from one area to the other. So those are clear indications that we are at the cusp of a new area, and that this happens all the time when we have this combination of fields, because the reason we are combining fields is because our existing knowledge that we have in field A is not enough anymore, nor is the existing knowledge in field B. It is the proverbially the combination of A and B, the sum is more than the parts in this case. So this is what's happening. And I think as a conclusion, I think this is really what I took away from this call. It is, of course, something that I've already been believing in, but it is just reinforcing my thesis that we are at the cusp of a new area, and space exploration, like I mentioned in my episode over the weekend, is one of the 4 big wealth creation areas. It's really happening, and it's happening, and this is now my conjecture, this is my analysis here. It is happening because the costs are coming down. The costs are being lowered. Space exploration is going from a centralized situation where central planning, central academic institutions, central funding from the government, all these things which have helped space get on the map, but then also have hindered space to really become a prolific area. Now this is changing. The private sector is kicking in, particularly through SpaceX, but of course we also have other companies, and through that we have lowering of the cost, increase of optionality. We have all these good things happening to space, and therefore space is becoming an area of wealth creation. I think with the fact that Phnam mentioned, which is the combination of studies that people choose to study, let's say material science and space engineering, and these have almost become their own degrees. That is something that is just, it's an indicator that our thesis is correct. Lastly, I want to mention also very important, when we have this new development in space, the question comes naturally, okay, what does that mean? What does that mean for Earth? What does that mean for our terrestrial, let's say, business opportunities? And we've already discussed some of it in context with the launch of the ARK Invest Space Exploration Fund. It is interesting to see that certain companies, certain sectors, certain new things can happen on Earth thanks to space. For example, we mentioned John Deere will have more access to satellite technology, to internet technology in rural areas, and therefore be able to sell more software and software type services in their agricultural equipment. So this is one area where we see huge potential. There's many other of such examples. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to discuss this further with Phnam. She didn't seem too interested in that part of the equation. She's more interested in designing space within space, and not necessarily. For example, I wanted to talk a little bit about things like fashion, product design, just how is space exploration impacting generally culture on Earth. That discussion just didn't go very far. And also, I did ask her, like, how do you think that we have more self-confidence as a species if we go to space? And she's absolutely yes. She herself feels like that. It is encouraging. It is empowering to be able to go to space and even to dare to think that that's possible. And I absolutely second that. Even us investors, I think it's just encouraging to have the ability to deploy capital in a space like that and to join companies either on boards or as investors or both, and just be part of it. That in itself is also already value. So as a conclusion, I think this is one of those conversations that we cherish a lot, because there's no specific agenda, but it always helps us to get to sort of get a little bit around the edges, solidify our thesis, learn new things. For example, the inability to procreate in space is an interesting problem that can be solved also through cell therapy and synthetic biology and cell engineering. So there are problems that we can solve for space that can be very, very useful, of course, for Earth. Something that we strongly believe in, and because space is at the cusp of disruption through fundamentally new concepts and engineering practices, and also because it's bringing more optionality to space, excuse me, the lower cost and the lower cost brings more optionality, lowering the cost of launch, lowering the cost of satellites, lowering the cost of space flight. All of these things will increase optionality and therefore also increase innovation. Thank you.